Hi scholars, this is Miss Quinones and thanks for joining me for another music lesson this week. On Monday, we talked a little bit more about the staff and note names and labeling notes correctly and all that stuff. So if you didn't see Monday's music video from me in Google Classroom, then make sure that you finish that before Friday. You have all week to turn in your assignments, scholars, so make sure that you get those done so that you don't get behind. Today we're going to be talking about rhythm and math. And I know that it's kind of weird to talk about those two things together. Lots of times we don't think about music and math going hand in hand or, being good friends. But actually, music and math, they use each other a lot. You can't really have music, you can't really have rhythm without also having math. You really need the both of them if you're trying to read music or count music or write or even play it. So you really need both math and rhythm together if you're trying to make something work. Before we do anything, scholars, I want you to pause this video and I want you to get some paper and also make sure that you get a pencil. We are going to be taking some notes today, so go ahead and pause and get those two things. If you already have a paper and a pencil, if you're good to go with those things, then at the end of the video, when you finish your notes, make sure that you save this paper and pencil because they're really going to help you get through today's assignment. So scholars, now let's start talking about rhythm and math and how they go together. So scholars, before we can even talk about math in music, we really have to talk about notes and how much they're worth. And I don't really mean like worth like dollars, I mean worth like how many beats they are. Anything that I underline or outline or do in yellow today, scholars, that's what I want you to write down for your notes. So just like in Monday's video, how anything in yellow you guys wrote down on your paper, it's going to be the same thing today. So scholars, the first thing I want you to write down is this label of quarter note. Now a quarter note is this type of note that's in this rectangle here. Now a quarter note is always got this circle or this oval at the bottom of it. It's always filled in. It's never empty. And then it also has a stick attached to the side of it. So when you write down the words quarter note, make sure that you're also drawing what it looks like. And then we're also going to label it. So our quarter note is equal to 1 beat. Beat is a word that's special to music. It's kind of like how we measure music. So instead of saying like $1 or 1 quarter, we would say it's 1 beat. So scholars, if 1 quarter note is equal to 1 beat, then if I had 2 quarter notes, I'll draw them in red. You don't have to do what I do in red. Remember just what I do in yellow. If I have 2 quarter notes like I do down here, and I wanted to add them together, it would be like adding 1 plus 1, because they're both equal to 1 beat, right? Since they're both equal to 1 beat, then that would turn into 2 beats. So that's kind of how we start to see that math and music go together. So even though these aren't really numbers, even though they're notes, they still make an equation and you still get like a product from it. So scholars, make sure that you have everything down in yellow for this slide. Remember, anything that's underlined or written in yellow you should have. If you ever need to pause or rewind, scholars, or you want to watch the whole video again, that's a-okay. Take all the time that you need. All right, now we're going to move on to some different type of notes. So scholars, now we're looking at something called a quarter rest. Now a quarter rest is also worth 1 beat, even though it has a different name. So it kind of has a different name because it's called a rest. So it's almost like a little pause that you would have in your music. But because it still has the word quarter in its name, it's still equal to 1 beat. So anything that you see with the word quarter in it in music, scholars, is still equal to 1 beat. So our question here, how many beats is each quarter rest? Well, each quarter rest equals 1 beat. So just like my last problem that I made, if I had 2 quarter rests, that would equal 2 beats. Because each one is worth 1, you put them together, and it would make 2. I know it's kind of hard to draw these quarter rests, scholars, but just try your best. If you don't quite get it, you can do a little bit of a squiggly line like I did in red, but just make sure that you have quarter rest, the title. Try your best to draw the rest there, and make sure that you have that it is equal to 1 beat, just like our quarter note. All right, scholars, we have a few more to get through. We're going to start going a little bit faster, but remember, just pause or rewind whenever you need to. All right, scholars, now we have something called a half note. Now, our half note looks a little bit different. So earlier, our quarter note looked like this. It was filled in. It had a stick attached to it. Our half note looks different because it is empty. It still kind of has that circle or that oval down at the bottom. It still has a stick attached to it, but it is empty on the inside. And it's also worth a different amount of beats. So make sure that you have your label for half note. Make sure that you draw it out here. And 1 half note is equal to 2 beats. It's kind of like a $50. If you guys have ever seen those $50 coins, they're bigger than quarters and they're kind of heavy. It's kind of like a $50 that's worth 2 quarters or 50 cents. A half note is the same because it's worth 2 beats. So in music, our half note is worth 2 beats. So let's pretend that I have a music math equation and I want to add 2 half notes together. Well, my first half note is worth 2 beats. My second one is also worth 2 beats. If I want to add them together, then that would create 4 beats. Remember, that word beats is always going to be really important because we need to measure our music in beats. Okay, scholars, remember you don't have to write down what I have in red, just what I take down in yellow. So remember our half note, it looks different because it's empty. It's also worth 2 beats instead of 1. And now we're going to start increasing our values. So let's head down to our dotted half note. Our dotted half note, scholars, it almost looks the same as our half note. It's kind of like the cousin of our half note. Because here you can see that we have an empty note with a line attached to it, but it's got this dot that follows it around. So make sure that you've got everything that I have in yellow, scholars. Now our dotted half note is kind of like the cousin of the half note because it's equal to 3 beats. It's longer than our half note. It's also longer than our quarter note because our quarter note and our quarter rest, they were only worth 1 beat, right? Our half note, our regular half note, was worth 2 beats. Now our dotted half note is worth 3 beats. And that's because this little dot, it adds an extra beat on our half note. So make sure that you have your half note drawn just the way it would have been drawn last time. And then you also have your dot that follows it. So if we had, let's pretend to do another music math equation. If we had 2 dotted half notes and I wanted to add them together, remember each one is worth 3 beats. So this would be 3 beats. This other one would also be 3 beats. when you add them together, they would be 6 beats. And I'm always remembering to write that word beats in every time. So this next one that we're going to do, scholars, is probably going to be our largest note. So we went from having 1 beats to 2 beats to 3 beats. Now our next type of note is going to have 4 beats. Remember, make sure that everything that I have in yellow is also on your paper and notes. All right, scholars, so our whole note is worth 4 beats, like I just mentioned. Our whole note, you can see it looks different from all the other notes, as all it is basically is this like empty oval or this empty circle that we have in music. So a whole note is really easy to look at because it doesn't have a stick. It's missing that. So our whole note is worth 4 beats. It's one of the largest notes that you can have in music. It's extra, extra long. And so just like our quarter note that was worth 1 beat, we had our half note that was 2 beats. We had our dotted half note that was 3 beats. Now we've reached our whole note, and usually our whole note is like by itself because it's so big, it's so long. So our whole note is worth 4 beats. Now if you wanted to do a music math equation with a whole note, you could do a whole note, which would just be empty, plus another whole note. I know they look like zeros, but they're actually whole notes. Now, one whole note is worth 4 beats. Another whole note is worth another 4 beats. And when I add all those up together, I would get 8 beats. See, so music math, it's not too hard, as it uses a lot of the same rhythms, a lot of the same beats over and over and over again, scholars. So now what we're going to do is actually get into the music math of it. Now that you have your paper that tells you what each beat or what each note equals, now when we start doing music math, it's going to get easier and easier and easier to solve some music equations. All right? Remember, whatever I have in yellow, you should also have. If you need to rewind or pause, you can do that too. All right, scholars, so since all notes have a certain amount of counts or a certain amount of beats, beats is another way that you can say counts, we can use them like math equations. So if you're looking down here at this first equation, you can see I have a quarter note plus a whole note. So before we do anything, let's figure out what each of those is worth. My quarter note, if I'm looking at my notes that I wrote down, we know that my quarter note is equal to 1 beat. My whole note, that was my really, really big note that we just talked about, that was equal to 4 beats. Now, because I had 1 beat plus 4 beats, that's how this person got 5 beats. They should have written the word beats in there, so that's always really important. I'm actually going to write it right here next to it. All right, scholars, so now you don't actually need to write this page. If you want to write this page with me, I think that's a good idea, but you don't have to because we're going to do some more of these later. So now let's start doing our next one. Our next music equation is this one in my other yellow rectangle, and this is actually a subtraction equation. So let's first take a look at how many each of these beats are. We have my first whole note right here. We know that that is worth 4 beats. And then we are subtracting, so we're minusing. And we have a quarter note. Well, we had a quarter note in the last one, so I remember it's worth 1 beat. So I have 4 beats minus 1 beat, and that's how this person got 3 beats. I hope this is making some more sense, scholars. This math isn't going to get too crazy, And a lot of the time we're just going to be doing addition and subtraction. Now these next slides, scholars, I do want you to write these down so that you can get some extra practice in for your assignment and for your homework, okay? So scholars, what we're going to do now is actually pause our video. I want you to try solving these. So right before you pause, what I want you to do is write down each one of these equations. So what you're going to do is actually draw out the notes and the equations. So like you would draw this half note, you would draw the addition symbol, you would draw the quarter note and the equal sign, and then you would tell me what each of these equals. So tell me how many beats it equals. Just like in our last one, they told us how many beats it equals. The only thing I want you to write down is how many beats it is, plus the equation, and try and solve for how many beats it is. So go ahead and hit pause and try doing all 4 of these equations. Okay, scholars, if you have finished solving all of our music math equations, let's go ahead and solve these really quick all together. So we have in this first one over here, we have a half note. Well, I know my half note is worth 2 beats, right? That's what my notes told me. And we're adding a quarter note. So when I add a half note and a quarter note together, that gives me 3 beats. Always make sure that you're writing the word beats in there, because remember, we have to say what kind of things we're adding together. Now let's move on to our second one. It's also addition. Here we have a dotted half note. Now that dotted half note, that was the one that added an extra beat. So instead of it being 2 beats like our regular half note, it's 3 beats. We're adding again. And we have our whole note. Our whole note is our longest note. It's worth 4 beats. So when I add 3 and 4 beats together, that gives me 7 beats. If you didn't write the word beats in, scholars, just make sure that you're writing it down next to or underneath wherever you wrote your solutions at. Now, scholars, we're going to go down here. We have some subtraction problems. So here we have 4 beats because this is a whole note, and we are subtracting another whole note. So we're subtracting actually another 4 beats. So what are we left with? Well, we're actually left with 0 beats. We don't have anything left. So we're left with 0 beats there. It kind of looks like they're all half notes, or sorry, all whole notes all sitting together. Now in our last one, we have another whole note. Remember our whole note, it's our longest, it's worth 4 beats. We are subtracting again, and we're actually subtracting that dotted half note. So just like in my last one, it's worth 3 beats. When I subtract them together, all I have is 1 beat left. Okay, scholars, this is kind of what we're going to be doing today and what you will be doing in your homework. So let's look at what your homework actually is. What I need you to do, scholars, is actually go back into Google Classroom. So since the pages didn't really fit in our PowerPoint today, go back to Google Classroom and click on the 2 pictures that I put in the instructions for today's assignment. Okay, they're going to be music pages that have like these music equations on them. Okay, when you finish all of the music equations, you're going to take a picture or a video just like always. You're going to show it to me in either Google Classroom, like always, or in Flipgrid. If you want to use the Flipgrid code, it's down here. If you just want to click on the link that I put in the assignment, that's okay too. But remember, you can also return things in Google Classroom, scholars, so if you just want to take a picture of it and put it in the Google Classroom assignment, that's okay too. This is what the pages kind of look like. You can try doing them with this video so that you don't have to go back into Google Classroom, but I think that everything is a little bit small. So if you want to see everything a little bit bigger, make sure you're doing everything right. Remember, just go back to Google Classroom. You're going to see these exact same pages, except bigger, right there. Okay, scholars? I'm really excited. I know that this music math isn't too tough. It's lots of addition and subtraction for your assignment today. And remember, you have all the way until Friday to get this one done and also get Monday's done if you didn't do that one. All right, scholars, I'm excited to see everything that you finish, and don't worry, you don't have to print these out, okay? You don't have to print these 2 pages out. Instead, you can just use like a regular notebook paper, and you can write out your responses in these little boxes on regular notebook paper. So just like we did when we were doing this one, it's gonna be the same thing. You'll write out the equation, you'll write your answer, and then you'll take a picture of it, just like I wrote right here. Okay, scholars, I'm excited to see everything that you get done. And remember, you can watch this video again, or you can ask me, like in a Google Classroom chat or anything like that, if you need some extra help. Okay, scholars, I'll see you later. Bye.